ladies and gentlemen. This is Kim C., and you're listening to the Year of Underrated Stephen King podcast. I'm a university fiction teacher at the helm of this one-woman show, where I read Stephen King stories, swoon and fawn and gush, and occasionally ponder and mentally spiral, and then I arrange all thoughts and emotion into a somewhat digestible audible format, and here we are. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have an extra special Farewell to Summer Outlier episode with previous Constant Reader interview guest, horror author, John Langan. If you're not familiar with Mr. John Langan and would like to get to know this magical man a little better, please jump back a few episodes to John's Constant Reader interview and immediately head to your local book merchant and get your hands on his work. He is absolutely the best, my guys. Everyone loves this man. He is a star, a blazing talent, an incredible human. I'm quickly becoming his #1 fan in the non-Annie Wilkes sense. But after my Constant Reader interview with John, I knew I wanted to talk with him again because he's a huge fan of Stephen King short stories, and so am I. At some point in the unknown future, I knew I wanted to activate teacher mode in both myself and Mr. Langan with the shorter King work, and serendipitously, I happened to find the perfect story to chat with John about in the brand new Stephen King short story collection released in June of this year, You Like It Darker. Inside You Like It Darker is a story originally published in Esquire magazine in October 2020 called On Slide In Road. This is an eerie little morsel with strong roots connected to another incredible American writer named Flannery O'Connor and her super famous and highly studied short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find. What we have with On Slide In Road is an awesome example of King channeling and paying homage to a stellar American literary voice, and not only providing his own unique spin on her story, but also doing what King does best and highlighting these classical authors who everyone should have their eyes on. I, the eternal precocious 7-year-old Girl Scout forever at heart, reached out to Mr. John Langan and asked if he would bring his fiction teacher self to the podcast to compare and contrast Flannery O'Connor's short story as well as King's homage to hers with his story On Slide In Road. Sweet listeners, that's what we have here today. Mr. Langan and I are taking everyone to English class for a little while in celebration of King's veneration of O'Connor, as well as the stellar strength found within the new short story collection, You Like It Darker. Now, before we proceed, there is a huge buyer beware sticker attached to this episode. Firstly, I believe all of you will really enjoy this episode a whole lot more if you've recently given Flannery O'Connor's short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, a quick read. I know a lot of us might have hopefully read this one in high school, and you might be familiar with it, but a quick refresh is super encouraged. I promise it will take you less than 20 minutes. It's about 13 to 15 pages. It's scary and brutal and blood-soaked, and you will absolutely adore it. But in addition to that, it's also highly recommended you've read King's story On Slide In Road, so one has a deeper comprehension with what John and I are comparing. In addition to that, there are a few spoilers for some of the stories found within You Like It Darker, so if you haven't yet read that collection, we might want to put a pause on this episode because I don't want to destroy any King reading experience for anyone. Now, forgive the crass phrase I'm about to utter, but if you really want to throw caution to the wind and head into this episode bareback, then don't let me stop you. I'm glad you're here, and I hope you have a good time, but don't be upset if you learn more than you wanted, because a strong warning was in fact provided. Anyway, in this episode, you will hear the wonderful, intelligent, hilarious, and oh so charming horror author John Langan talk about Flannery O'Connor, the author, her story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, and then we both segue into On Slide In Road, as well as the power and brilliance found within some of the heavy-hitting stories within You Like It Darker, specifically Rattlesnakes, The Answer Man, Two Talented Bastards, and The Dreamers. Oh, my loves. This episode is rich, deep, decadent, and there are many creatures afoot. Alligators and snakies abound. I love this episode so much, my friends. I am smiling ear to ear. Prepare oneself for wild and weird and wonderful, and what a joy it is to welcome Mr. Langan back to the Year of Underrated Stephen King podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, let's start these engines and begin the first, and hopefully not the last, Stephen King short story hour with John Langan. Mr. Langan, what a joy it is to see you, my friend. Welcome back to the Year of Underrated Stephen King.
Thank you so much, Professor. It's great to be back here, and I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation.
Me too. So to tell everybody out there listening what this is going to be about, this wild adventure of an episode, I recently finished the brand new short story collection that all the King people are reading. Hopefully we're all reading it. You Like It Darker. And in that collection, there's a story called On Slide in Road, which is based off of one of my all-time favorite short stories from Flannery O'Connor. And it's one that I studied a lot in school. I do teach it every now and again. And so I decided right then and there, I need to ask Mr. John Langan for his thoughts because I know he loves the King short stories. And so I just had to talk to you about it. I had to make this happen. And so I bothered you and made you come on the show.
Yes, tell this man, please, I'm doing it. You can put the gun down. It's okay. No, it's my pleasure. I love short story talk. I love, it's wonderful to talk about novels, but there's a way in which you can really get into the nuts and bolts of writing with a short story or, a poem in a way that it can be sometimes kind of difficult to do with a novel, at least in a short period of time. I guess if you have, a whole, several long classes or you're writing a book yourself, you can maybe tear apart a novel and say, look at all this cool stuff in here. But a short story, that's easier. Not to say easy, but easier to do.
Very true. I think the real craftsmanship gets into those tight screws when you see, okay, how do we get something that is powerful, impactful, and short? How do we do that? How do you harness and distill the power of a novel into, I don't know, under 50 pages, under 75 pages? I think novella is like over the 75 page. So yeah, under 50, how do we do that? And so King, I think, is one of the most skilled individuals who consistently plays in this medium. He always is flexing these short story muscles, and it's so great to chat with others who realize this is so cool. These are so neat to investigate.
Yeah, absolutely. The funny thing for me personally is that when I was a senior in high school, the class my senior English class, we studied Flannery O'Connor's stories, her novel, The Violent Buried Away, and also her stories. And I was not a fan at first. I was reading these things and I was just like, what is this? And then I was going back at the time, I was going back through Danse Macabre. And I noticed that King mentions Flannery O'Connor, and he says, "Oh, she's one of the finest short story writers our country has ever produced," and that made me say, "Oh, wait, basically, if Stephen King likes this, I better take another look at it." And so that opened up O'Connor for me in all kinds of ways. And so there's a way in which I kind of feel like, not to be too melodramatic, but that Stephen King kind of gave me the gift of Flannery O'Connor, and I really appreciate that, and I appreciate being able to talk about the way that he writes this story in the new collection that responds to what may be her most famous story, A Good Man Is Hard to Find.
I'm so excited. Perfectly said, really beautifully said. And I think a lot of King fans can echo that. King is such a vocal fan of the titles and authors who have influenced him. Even to this day, he's consistently plugging and celebrating other voices. And that has allowed other King fans to broaden their horizons and say, holy crap. And for me, as a fiction teacher, I just love it that when the majority of King titles are always connected to titles that are taught in school.
Mm-hmm.
In Hearts in Atlantis, we've got Lord of the Flies. In Blaze, that's a distillation of Steinbeck's
Of Mice and Men, right?
Thank you,
Yeah,
John.
yeah.
Yeah, it's all over the place. Revival, we have that homage to Frankenstein. It's all over the place if your eyes are open, and I love that.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, go back to The Shining. Well, actually, go back to Carrie, and he's making references to The Haunting of Hill House, somewhat obliquely. Go to Salem's Lot, and you've got Wallace Stevens, the Emperor of Ice Cream. Go to The Shining, and you got The Mask of the Red Death, and so on. So, yeah, the Firestarter, it was a pleasure to burn. You know, he makes reference to Fahrenheit 451. So I think he's worn his influences openly and unashamedly. And yeah, when I think about that, I always come back to Danse Macabre because there are so many writers, Peter Straub, Shirley Jackson, Ramsey Campbell, among many, many others, that book introduced me to, made me go search out in the library. And it's kind of amazing in a way. And here we are talking about yet another writer that without Stephen King, I probably just would have written off and said, oh, well, whatever, it's too weird. But, when I started thinking about these things as, well, they're kind of horror stories, then that allowed me access into them in this way that then in turn expanded my notion of maybe what a horror story could be and could do.
Oh, I love that. And that makes me so happy. So at this point in time, I want to dig in a little bit to A Good Man is Hard to Find. And I'm sad to realize that a lot of our listeners might not have read this. And I want them to so bad right now, because it's only about 13 pages, give or take, with your typeset. So can you give a brief synopsis on what Flannery O'Connor's story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, is about, and what you know about Miss O'Connor, her life, etc.?
Well, yeah, O'Connor lives. She's a kind of mid-century American writer. She's primarily identified with Georgia and a place called Milledgeville. She does spend a couple of years at the University of Iowa Writers Workshop when that's still a kind of a new thing, and she's among the early graduates. She actually traveled around a bit to New York City, to the Writers Colony in Yaddo in upstate New York. And when she was younger, she was very dynamic. She started life in wanting to be a cartoonist. She was terribly influenced, much to her embarrassment later in life, by Edgar Allan Poe's work. She talked about like H.P. Lovecraft is like, I discovered Poe, yay! And O'Connor's like, oh my God, yes, Poe. But so she wanted to be a cartoonist, but then she got the writing bug, and she ultimately went to Iowa, and which was in some ways a sort of a tiny place that compared to what it is now. Wrote some short stories, and was generally, I think, reasonably well received there. There was some kind of drama with a student who was accused of being a communist and this sort of stuff, and she got involved in it to an extent that I don't really know the full details to, but there's actually a pretty decent PBS American Masters biography of O'Connor that's like an hour and change, and that gives you a decent sense of her life. Maybe the two biggest things to know about her is that she was raised as a Catholic in the Protestant South, and she remained a devout Catholic throughout her life. And when she was, man, I want to say like just this side of 30, I think, she was diagnosed with lupus. She had a number of different ailments. Nobody was 100% sure what was going on. And then ultimately, the diagnosis was given of lupus, which was really a terminal diagnosis. Her father had died of the disease when she was when she was in her teens. And so she moved in with her mother, Regina. And they, Regina kind of looked after her for the rest of her life. She kept, she did, while she could, she did travel to different colleges reading her work. She was, there's a book of her interviews that's available, for example. Some of them were recorded on local TV and what have you. She was also a voluminous letter writer, or she wrote a big volume of letters. Anyway, she wrote a lot of letters, and some of those were collected in. Oh man, what is the name of that volume now? I want to say A Habit of Being, but I think that's her. I think that's the name of her collected essays. I always get those two confused. Well, in any event, you can read her letters, and yeah, she writes two novels, Wise Blood, which would be filmed in the early '70s by John Huston, and a second novel called The Violent Buried Away. And she'd started work on a third novel at the time of her death. She had completed two collections of stories and and the rest of her stories, she had enough for a third collection. Those stories were ultimately, all of them were collected in the collected stories, which I think won the National Book Award. She's one of those writers who is still startling to read because she's interested very much in the violent and in the grotesque and also in the spiritual in very odd ways. I think, speaking as someone who went to 12 years of Catholic school, Flannery O'Connor's Catholicism was quite bracing and quite a shock because it's very extreme and very dramatic and even melodramatic. So I think the number of writers, I should say, who mention her as an influence on them continues to grow. It's everybody reads her short stories, it seems. And there are a couple, such as A Good Man Is Hard to Find, that, every high school student is sort of forced to read. But despite that fact, it's still a really, really great story. I just read it an hour ago in preparation for our talk. And it is still as stunning as ever. It is just like a slap in the face in all the best ways. And it's no surprise to me, I suppose, or no wonder. It's a pleasant surprise, maybe, that King should have looked at this story and said, "Yeah, I kind of want to write my own response to that story."
Well, we must pause briefly for a round of applause. A standing ovation for Mr. Langan. That was so excellent. You encapsulated everything beautiful about Miss O'Connor. I love it.
Thank you.
When you were in school, was Iowa Writers, was that as bourgeois and fancy and
It was, yeah, because at that point, people like Cheever, didn't Cheever come out of there, or did he teach there? I can't remember. Yeah, there were plenty of people. This would have been about 86, 87. But even by then, there were plenty of people who had graduated from there. And obviously now at this point, it's like the sort of holy grail,
Yep.
for certain kinds of fiction writers anyway. I mean, we have a family friend who graduated from there in nonfiction, creative nonfiction. And so she came over to dinner one night. And of course I was like, well, what's it like? And she said, well, I was just in the creative nonfiction, so kind of cool your jets. But she did say her impression of the fiction writing part of it is that it's very intense and it's not for everybody. And that some people who go to it really, really benefit from it. And some people, it's kind of, they almost have to get over their instruction there to find out what they needed to do.
I had a couple friends who applied and none of us got in. Like nobody got into Iowa. And a couple of people were really bummed out about it, but I think it was probably a good thing. I think it's like almost too much. And I don't have the drinking ability to survive there.
Well, it's funny, right? Like my younger son is studying music. He's a musical studio composition major at SUNY Purchase, which is within the SUNY system. That's the big music school. And it was almost a choice between that and the Berklee College of Music in Boston. And a number of people said to us, don't do Berklee. It's an insane amount of money, and the pressure is insane. And what most people do is they go to Berklee for a year, they make all their contacts they need to make, and then they drop out. and they're still $70,000 in debt. And so my son went to Purchase, which is a much more kind of supportive and nurturing kind of program, and rigorous, but not insane. And he has a friend who went to Berkeley and basically said that it wasn't his thing. There are people, I understand, who thrive in that kind of insane pressure, and that, they buy into it, and, I'm a piece of coal that you're making into a diamond. But that, honestly, I just don't think that's really useful. It's never really been useful for me. I don't think it's useful for anybody. Feel free to disagree. If some people really feel they need to be, it's like a rite of passage or something, I think it's maybe because, not to be too tangential, but, when we're writing, we're filled with so much self-doubt. And when somebody says to us, when the first time a teacher says to us, this is really great, we're like, yay. But then the next time they say it, we're like, really? Are you sure? And when you have a teacher who just loves your work and gives you good grades, it's sort of, you sabotage yourself. You're like, there's no way I can be this good. Nah, that person's just, they're flattering me. And so I think that for some people, when they get into a workshop where they just get torn to shreds, they feel like, oh, thank God, like these guys see through me. And I'm not saying you have to lie to people, but I'm also saying that, tearing someone a new one doesn't, I don't see that really doing any good. So
one tiny thing, and then we'll transition we'll get back on track here. You reminded me, you're bringing up all of my grad school memories, but the best feedback I ever received was actually from my classmate, and I loved it so much. To this day, it makes me so happy. He was such a cool individual, John. He worked the night shift at a hotel, and he would just stay and write, and he was a very pensive, brooding guy, quiet. I think I had a little crush on him. And we were in workshop together. He hardly ever spoke, but then my story comes up. And he says, Kim, your writing is like a 5-star hotel, but when you screw up, it's like a rat runs across the floor.
Well, I mean, it's a creative way to put things, right?
It was the best thing anyone had ever said to me, because he was right. I would have a troublesome part where I couldn't nail exactly what I wanted to say with plot or whatever. And yeah, I think of that all the time when I do personal compositions, but he wasn't unkind. It was the sandwich. He had a little bit of positivity with the criticism, and there's a rat running across the floor of the 5-star hotel.
When you come right down to it, you're a 5-star. Your writing is a 5-star hotel, so it's like there's this little thing in it, but it's still a 5-star hotel. So, yeah, I had a teacher, a writing teacher, who suggested, and I've been thinking about this recently, that those parts in our stories where the rat runs across the floor, as it were. There's something that we can't quite work out, where there's like a sort of fault, if you will, in the story. She said, why not think about this as like a fault line, that there's something here, that there's something that needs, energy that needs to be released, things that are sliding against each other. And to be honest with you, I mean, I'm still processing that. This is like 30 years later. I'm still processing what she said, but I think about that the rat might be more interesting than the 5-star, or at least it might be interesting to see, where is the rat staying in the 5-star hotel? Like is there an underside to the 5-star hotel? Is there, which I get is like sort of destroying his metaphor or his comparison, but I think about those kinds of things, that the places in your work where it's least comfortable, it's most weird, it's not doing what it needs to do, but it's kind of, like I think that stuff may be useful. Maybe not. Maybe you just need to, get the exterminator and there's the, get rid of the rat. But
oh, I love this so much, John. Oh my goodness, such good stuff. But yes, getting back on the road, pun intended,
as it were. Yes.
Getting our 4 wheels on the pavement there. Can you give a brief synopsis as to what A Good Man is Hard to Find is about? What happens in this story?
We have a family that consists of a grandmother who's basically our point of view character. And she lives with her son, his wife, and their three children, two children who seem to be about 8 years old. They're the two of them about that age, and a baby. And they're going to take a vacation to Florida, family vacation to Florida. Grandma's coming along, but Grandma really doesn't want to go to Florida, and she really wants to go to East Tennessee to see her where her family is from. And so she is trying to convince her son at the beginning of the story that they shouldn't go driving around because there's this homicidal maniac named the Misfit out on the loose, and he might catch up with them and kill them. And her son just ignores her. Her son really he's not very nice. I mean, the grandmother is kind of insufferable. But at the same time, there's nobody in the story who's really sufferable, I guess. There's, as Stephen King said about another Flannery O'Connor story, holy Jesus, what a crew. So they go on this vacation. And although the grandmother doesn't want to go, she's first in the car in the morning. But the reason that she's first in the car is that she's taking her cat, Pitty Sing, with her because she doesn't want to leave Pitty Sing alone for, I think it's like 3 days. So the cat is hidden in the car. So she sits between the kids in the back seat. It's funny. This is in and of itself. This is like an index to how old this story is because the dad and mom sit in the front. Mom's just holding the baby in the front seat, and everybody's cool with that. And it was a different time. So off they go, and they see all kinds of things. They see a field that has 5 or 6 graves in the middle of it. And as they're driving along, they stop at this place called Red Sammy's to get some barbecue. And Red Sammy and his wife don't really seem to be getting along that well. They have a sort of like a monkey that's like their mascot who's chained to a tree. And the minute the monkey sees the kids, the monkey scurries up the tree. The monkey has obviously dealt with children before. And they sit up there and they talk about the misfits running around and they speak in these kind of like cliches, there's just no winning. You just can't. Good man is hard to find. Well, ain't that the truth, And then off they go. And the kids are really. I should add that the kids, John Wesley and June Starr, they're pretty bratty. Their manners are pretty bad. The Red Sammy's wife says, "Oh, would you like to live with me and be my little girl?" And June Starr is like, "I wouldn't stay here for $1 million." That's she says that over and over again. I wouldn't do this for $1 million. He wouldn't do this for $1 million. So the grandmother has a nap, and when she wakes up from the nap, she suddenly remembers, oh my God, there's a mansion not that far from here, and we should go and see this mansion. Well, the kids whine and complain, and the son, the dad, is like, okay, fine, we're just going for 5 minutes. So they drive down a dirt road. And as they drive down the dirt road, something occurs to the grandmother, and she kicks her foot out, and she knocks over the little hidey place where Pitty Sing the cat is, and the cat leaps out and attaches himself to her son, who drives off the road. The car flips over. The mother and child are thrown out and baby are thrown out of the car. The grandmother is thrown into the front seat. The kids, of course, once the kids realize they're not hurt, they're delighted. They're like, we've had an accident. All caps. And the mother has broken her collarbone, I think, or her shoulder. She's a bit more seriously injured, and Bailey doesn't seem to be that injured, but he's obviously in a certain amount of shock. And the grandmother's like, "Oh, I think I have ruptured an organ," but it's because we find out what she realized was that the house she was thinking of is in fact not in Georgia, but in East Tennessee. So they were completely in the wrong place. Well, who comes along mere minutes later but a big black car that looks like a hearse, and 3 men get out of it. And they have guns. That's never a good sign. One of them isn't wearing a shirt, also not a good sign. And the grandmother says, "You're the misfit."
Oh, geez.
And at that moment, in a sense, it's all over. Everybody knows it's all over. Her son curses her out. O'Connor doesn't tell us what he said, but even the kids are like, "Oh my God, Dad," So we get this horrible kind of situation unfolds where this character called the Misfit tells his men to okay, take the dad and the boy out into the woods there, would you? And out they go into the woods, and a couple of minutes later, there's a pair of gunshots. And then, why don't you take this woman and her baby out, and the little girl out into the woods? So while that's happening, while this family is being murdered, just off stage in these dark woods, the grandmother is having this conversation with the misfit, and she's just running through all these cliches. You must come from good stock. You must have good family. You wouldn't shoot a lady. She's all about saving herself. And he says, "Oh yeah, I had a great family, absolutely." And she says, "Oh, you must be a good man." And he says, "Nope, I've never been a good man." But he also he's a sort of a philosophical, we suspect, murderer. That he tells us that he could never figure out why he went to jail in the first place. They put him in jail. They said that he was guilty, but he can't understand why. And so now, and this is why he considers himself the misfit. He doesn't fit in to everything, to society. And so his modus operandi now, as he puts it, is to sign his name to everything that he does, so that when all is said and done, he can look at, this is what I signed my name to. This is what you're accusing me of. Do these things add up? I'll take responsibility for whatever I've done. And, the old lady, as she sees her death approaching, and she said, Jesus, maybe. And O'Connor says it almost sounds like she's cursing, but he doesn't take it as a curse. He takes it as an occasion to offer biblical commentary. And he says, if Jesus was for real, then there's nothing for me to do but to follow him. But if he isn't, then what's the point? Like, I might as well just kind of mess around. And he gets quite upset, and he says, it isn't fair that I wasn't there, that I couldn't see and know for sure. And the old lady has this moment. They're very close together. His face is inches from hers, and the old lady has this moment. She just says, "You're one of mine. You're one of my own babies." And she reaches out and she touches him, and he springs backwards and he shoots her through the heart 3 times, and she falls over. But she falls over with a smile on her face, staring up at the sky, right? And in the meantime, the bully boys, the accomplices, have come back, and they're like, "Oh well, so much for her." And the misfit says, she would have been a good woman if there was someone there to shoot her every moment of her life, or every minute of her life. And his friends make some kind of stupid remark, and he tells them to shut up. There's no real pleasure in life, and that's the end of the story. And it's like, boom, it's a crazy kind of apocalyptic story about this, this murder of this entire family by this maniac. And however bad or obnoxious the family might be, I mean, they don't deserve this. And however philosophical the misfit might be, he's still a murderer. He still kills all of them. But there's something in that moment of connection, call it a moment of grace, when the grandmother is able to see him as her child, and therefore he's no longer a misfit, he's one of hers, to see that profound connection that maybe redeems her, and also scares the misfit, because it's entirely, I think it actually says, he leaps back as if he'd been bitten by a snake, and not to lean too heavily yet on sort of biblical references or whatever, but you get the snake in the Garden of Eden, and what does the snake represent? It's knowledge. It's the fall from innocence into knowledge, right? And so in a way, he has been stung. Something has happened to him. The text seems to indicate. 3 bullets in the heart. I mean, there's all kinds of religious symbolism there, right? The Trinity, the heart, the sacred and immaculate hearts of Jesus and Mary. The grandmother is looking up at she's smiling. She's looking up at the sky. So, it feels as if something redemptive has happened to her. She's been redeemed in the kind of moment of crisis. When the moment of crisis arrived, she was adequate. She was, sort of tested and found worthy. There were lots of people who hate her, and there were all sorts of famous commentaries on the story that say, "No, she's a witch. She has a cat." She's a crazy cat lady. No, sorry, and that I don't think is true. I think that she's not very likable, and part of O'Connor's skill as a writer is to give us the redemption of someone who is unlikable. not unlovable necessarily, but unlikable. No one here is really likable. They're just, this kind of middle American family that just, dad is overworked and oh my God, there's another kid. And the two older kids are sort of precocious, but to the point of obnoxiousness. And grandma just feels probably powerless to a certain extent. She keeps trying to assert her agency through her son, through kind of manipulating her son into doing what she wants him to do. It's a story that is heavy with irony. At the beginning, the grandmother says, well, you don't want to go on vacation. We could run into the misfit and he'll kill us. Well, yeah, that's what happens. There's this foreshadowing, right? They see the 5 or 6 graves in the field. A good man is hard to find, it turns out. And in fact, it's a good woman that they find at the end of the story. They, the grandmother says, no, we need to take this detour. And so she brings them directly into the path of the misfit. So yeah, there are all sorts of ways in which this could have just been a story of an annoying family trip to Florida instead of this much more horrifying thing.
Oh my gosh. Round of applause, Mr. Langan. I would be the nerdiest front row girl in your class with my hand shooting up. That was awesome.
Thank you. It's a great story. It's a great story that just, every time I read it, there's something new that sort of pops out at me. And it is still as harrowing as ever. Knowing what's to come does not make this story any less harrowing. When O'Connor used to do readings of her fiction, she would start by telling you what happens. She would say, okay, I'm going to read you a story called Good Man is Hard to Find. It's about a family that meets up with a homicidal maniac and he kills all of them. And everyone in the audience would say whatever the 50s equivalent of spoiler alert was. And she would evoke the ancient Greeks. And she would say, when everybody went to see Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, they knew the story. They weren't like, oh my God, who do you think killed his father? It was what they wanted to see. What they were interested in seeing was, how is Sophocles going to tell this story? So it's not so much the what as the how. And she wanted her readers to do something similar. She wanted her readers to know, oh yeah, there's death coming at the end of this story, but to be surprised by the manner in which it arrives.
Oh, I love that so much. And you're so right, John. I've read this thing, I've lost count, and I feel exactly the same. I know what's going to happen. And yet the dialogue, this is such a dialogue heavy story. And there's so much character development through the dialogue. We're getting to know this family and learn June Star and John Wesley are kind of bratty, kind of precocious. Grandma's kind of self-centered and obnoxious. The mom is very meek and mild. And Bailey is just, a stressed out dad. And that's all revealed through dialogue. It's really skillful. And yet, the dialogue, I think, is the great bewitching presence in this story. It makes us relax. We really relax and feel like we're just spending a car ride with this family on the way to Florida, and they've got the cat, and it's just sort of jaunty and charming, especially when they're getting some barbecue and then they're back in the car and we're just along for the ride, and the dialogue is very disarming. And then we had that tiny little dangle of the irony at the beginning. Oh, the misfit, watch out. They also mention it again at the barbecue place with Red Sammy. He's like, oh yeah, I bet he would knock over a place like this. We better watch out.
Yeah.
So it's looming, but it's so subtle because the characters are charming, the dialogue's disarming. And then, oh my God, after the accident, and then we're just in this third act when he gets there, as if it was always going to end this way. It was always going to go this very, the tone drops. We absolutely plummet off a cliff.
Yeah.
It is so frightening. And I love this story so much, John, because it really does what King does so beautifully, which is to take human evil, human horror. There's nothing supernatural about this story on the surface, and it's just the ugliness of humanity, the wild, animalistic, depraved sides of humanity. And yet there's this very civil discourse between Grandma and the misfit, and it's
Yeah.
philosophical and it's religious. And I love what you said about he springs back when he receives that empathy. She touches him, and it's almost too much. Like, he's too far gone. You can't, no, I'm way too far gone. I'm the misfit. I don't understand emotion and kindness and empathy. No, I'm not there. And you're so right. Lots of Catholic imagery in this, lots of biblical allusion. I read something, it's not too cuckoo pants, but they compare each character to a 7 deadly sin,
Uh-huh.
which, okay, like it tracks. It tracks.
Well, I think you're right that like so much of the specificity in the story allows then for so much interpretation then to kind of flourish around the story, right? And I think that's one of O'Connor's strengths as a writer, is that she has such a great eye for detail, and that allows somebody to say, "Oh, an old lady with a cat, huh? She must be a witch," and and the misfit with his glasses, whatever we're to make of, he wears these glasses. When he takes them off, his face seems really naked, childish almost, unguarded, right? But he needs to wear glasses, so therefore his vision isn't correct. And you can English teachers out there who are listening, you can get a lot of mileage out of this story. Okay,
Oh yeah.
it's you can make this thing go for
Weeks.
all right. I was going to say a class period, but sure, weeks. Yeah, it's because O'Connor is such a careful crafter of her fiction. And I think what you were saying about the tone changes is spot on. I feel like it was someone like T.C. Boyle who talked about it somewhere, that the way that the story begins in one place and ends, wow, like someplace really, really different. At the beginning, it's this sort of family squabble, Granny's being a pain again, and by the end they're all dead. They're all, it's like that, is it an Everyman where the character says, "Death, thou comest when I expected thee least," or something like that. And it's as if the misfit is that, he's death. You're not expecting him. You've had an accident, oh well, here comes death.
Yeah. Oh, it's just, I love this story so much, and I'm so glad that you're able to twist this sopping towel with me and just
Right,
squeeze out all the good stuff. And so it really is the greatest thing for me, John, to take Flannery O'Connor's haunting. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, this story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, was published in 1955. I need you to wrap your head around that.
Yeah.
1955. This is how genius and timeless this thing is. It's so fresh to this day. It's just hauntingly timely forever.
Yeah.
And then you get Stephen King, who's my favorite author ever. Steve is looking at this story and channels it for his own interpretation.
Yeah.
Called On Slide In Road, Mr. Langan. Let's jump over there for a hot second.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was funny, because what's interesting about the story, maybe the single most interesting thing is that he puts the nod to Flannery O'Connor after you've read the story.
Yep.
So as you're reading the story, if you haven't read Flannery O'Connor, you're like, oh, okay, fine. But if you have, you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And so, King plays with you then, and he says, oh, okay, you're an English major, right? You've read Flannery O'Connor? Yeah. You see what I'm doing? What do you think's going to happen next? What's going to, and so there's a way then in which part of the fun of the story is that kind of secondary level, right? Of you having read Flannery O'Connor thinking, oh, this isn't going to go good for Grandpa and the rest of the family. There's a couple of gangsters here, criminals anyway. Man, this is just not gonna go well. And the characters, the characters are different enough, and yet the son, who's driving the car again, is not the strongest of individuals. Let's put it. He doesn't have the strongest character. His wife is a bit more developed. Grandpa, it's hard to say. he seems a little irritating, but not nearly as irritating as the grandmother is. It's more that they're exasperated. Oh my God, we have to go see Aunt what's her name, so you can bring her a baseball card, whatever. Um, but right from in a way though, like what's interesting is right from the get-go, and part of what I think disguises initially the story's connection to O'Connor is that going to see your dying sister and bringing her this baseball bat and these baseball cards, that seems much more a gesture of mercy than and a kindly gesture. Even if you have to drag your freaking family along with you to go do it, it's the right thing to do. The shortcut, once again, there's a trip onto there's a shortcut which doesn't turn out so well. The car is off the road. Oh, there's where Slide In used to be. There is actually, in this case, there's the actual remains of a place as opposed to the imaginary mansion that the grandmother has conjured. And we have two criminals who are not nearly as interesting as the misfit is, but who are perhaps no less deadly, maybe even more deadly because they're just dumb and they've already killed somebody. And so it's, here's Grandpa who's in his 70s, who is not feeling as fit as he's ever felt, kind of trying to figure out, how do I save my family from this? Because his son, I guess, on whom he might rely, for some type of Schwarzenegger-esque, something like that, action is just paralyzed. And so, Grandpa has to trick the robbers into who are going to kill them. I mean, that's
Yeah.
clear. He has to trick them into letting him get his baseball bat so he can wail on one of them. And then the other one, interestingly, he calls on any member of his family to help him, and only his granddaughter does. His granddaughter pulls down the hand of the other guy before he can shoot Grandpa. So together the two of them are able to defeat these guys, and there's a way in which it's a happier ending than we get in O'Connor. In a way, it's that there are lots of ways in which it seems to me, it sort of inverts what happens in O'Connor. Here, the old person is the literal savior of the family, as opposed to the literal death of the family. Even if the grandmother metaphorically or symbolically or spiritually saves the misfit, here Grandpa Grandpa gets out the baseball bat and takes care of business, as the kids say. And so he is, and where the family is just killed in O'Connor's story. In King's story, there's a suggestion that the family relations may have been damaged, that husband and wife may not be so good for them after this, because she has seen her husband having the chance to do something and just freezing up, and Grandpa isn't going to get to see his sister. That's I suppose for Grandpa, that's the bad thing, is that he's not going to see his sister, and she's not doing too well. So who knows how long, maybe he's passed up on his last chance to see her. But, as an old man, he's done something. He's kind of stepped forward and seized the moment and done something good, genuinely good for his family.
Such good stuff, Mr. Langan. I really, really enjoy King's take on it. And it's interesting when I look at it, I'm like, oh, it doesn't necessarily have the edge that O'Connor does. But I think because O'Connor, it's so masterful. And I know King didn't want to copy it. The ending's a lot softer. Grandpa saves the day. But one thing I really love about Grandpa is we have this tiny backstory of him in Vietnam. And he says, I saw these guys in Vietnam, and they're called scavengers and skedaddlers. And it's kind of sing-songy, but it's deep. And I like that, Grandpa's 75, he's a boomer and had seen some life, was in Vietnam. And I think that hard edge of life, death, bandits, bad guys, I don't know if our soft times, Gen X, millennials, I don't know, a lot of us haven't really seen that. I mean, granted, some have if you have seen combat, but the dad, Mr. Frank Brown, has had a soft life.
Yes.
It comes down to this family trying to make a U-turn where this old hotel used to be. and little Billy and Mary, who are 11 and 9. One thing that's great, John, is he does do the tonal drop. The tonal drop is there.
Yeah.
That's so integral to O'Connor's story, because Mary and Billy, they're bopping around and they go off from the car because the car's stuck. And so they're wandering around, and Billy looks into a hole and sees a woman's leg sticking out.
Yes.
And right then, the story is completely different for the reader.
Yeah.
And then suddenly there are two strange men right there, right next to little Billy, who's so vulnerable. They're all vulnerable. They're in the middle of nowhere, abandoned old hotel. And then now we have insert horror, insert calamity, insert danger. And then these two guys, like you said, are criminals, end up robbing the family. So they are murderers, but it seems like they just want cash at the time. But yes, the intentions are they're holding them up at gunpoint. And so thankfully, Grandpa saves the day. The family is spared, and they go bumping on down the road in the Buick, which Grandpa insisted they take. We got another old Buick, not the cool Buick from Pennsylvania, from a Buick, not the alien Buick.
I was going to say, yeah, cool, you know.
That would have been awesome. But I am really glad that we have that tonal shift, so the reader does feel what O'Connor brought originally, which is that dark drop. So we do get that. I'm thrilled about that. But I did want a darker ending, I think. And I think that's okay. But like you mentioned at the beginning, it seems that You Like It Darker is a distillation of mortality concepts, and it's King, I think, with a duller edge because of age and time. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's okay.
Well, I also think, I think that this story is part of a sequence of stories that, thematically speaking. What's the name of the one with the dog? Because I keep Lois. It's not Lois. It's the.
You're so close. It's Laurie.
Laurie. Oh my God. I'm sorry.
No worries. I screw up all the time, John.
And Rattlesnakes. Where King gives us these stories in which these old men are put in these really difficult situations, these really challenging situations, and they have to step up, if you like, or they have no choice, because the person. Say in the case of Slide In, your son is not the action hero, like it's only Grandpa has the, not just the experience, but the kind of tough-mindedness to see his way through this and to think, okay, I have to figure out a way out of this. And, here's a way that I can basically hurt these guys and protect my family. And something similar happens in Laurie, which I'll forget again in a minute, where the narrator of that story, has to fight an alligator. And it's the alligator, unlike the robber murderers and in Slide In, the alligator is just defending her clutch of eggs, we find out, but that she's no less deadly for all of that. And then, of course, in Rattlesnakes, Vic has to, how can I remember his name and not Laurie? Anyway, but, has to deal with this haunting situation. And so I think, what King is interested in is looking at these kinds of dramatic situations, and then let's just change one simple thing. Let's just make it your grandfather who has to deal with this, not you. And of course, I think, King is about 75, I think. So of course it's very easy to say, oh, well, this is him sort of reflecting, putting himself and a certain percentage or certain portion of his readership into these types of situations, which, fair enough. So I think that it doesn't, like, Slide In doesn't have the kind of theological speculation that O'Connor gives you. And there isn't the backdrop of this, these cliches that the characters are passing back and forth between each other about how terrible the world is, this fallen world we live in. It is in a sense, I think, more focused tightly in on the family and on the sort of dynamics of the family, and particularly on Grandpa himself, trying to fulfill his own kind of last mission, if you will, or a last mission. So I think, yeah, its focus for O'Connor, I feel like the focus, right, is getting to that point where the grandmother and the misfit are this far, right up in each other's faces. That's the focus. I think for King, maybe the focus is Grandpa getting his hands on that bat.
Oh, I love that.
That's that's the once he gets his hands on that bat, he says, "Oh, I've completely messed up my back," and as someone who has back problems myself, I'm like, I hear you, Grandpa. It's tough beating the heck out of those bad guys, but I think that to for Grandpa, it's about restoring that kind of very primal kind of agency, urgent agency, yeah.
It works. Oh, so well said, Mr. Langan. Such good observations. I love that because, yeah, and the bat, he does talk about that right away. As we learn in fiction, Chekhov said this: if the gun is
Right.
on the table, use it or lose it. You better use it. You got to use the elements. So he mentions this baseball memorabilia that his sister Nan was just obsessed with. This was her favorite stuff, and we're taking it to Aunt Nan in Falmouth, which is in Maine, I think. And I could be wrong. Is it?
I'm just, you're. Oh,
right.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're from the West. Yeah. It's all basically the same. New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont. It's all the same.
It is, but will people get mad if I say that, John?
Probably,
Exactly.
especially people from Falmouth, wherever that is. Yeah.
Right. Oh my goodness. Right. I'll tread carefully there, but they're going to Falmouth.
Someone will send you a T-shirt or whatever that says like Falmouth, and then whatever the state is, Massachusetts or Maine or whatever.
I mean, I get it. I get it. Yeah, there's nothing out here. So I don't care who. Yeah, I would never get mad at anybody for insulting where I live, this Dust Bowl. Anyway.
But you're right. Like you've mentioned the journey a couple of times, and it's interesting that these three stories in particular, maybe other stories in the collection, in Slide In, you're going on the shortcut. In Laurie, you're on the walkway, that wooden walkway, and in Rattlesnakes, Vic has made the journey to the key and then has to like make a smaller journey, to the end of the key to try to exorcise the ghosts of these malevolent toddlers, or the malevolent ghosts of these toddlers, I guess is a fairer way to put it. Malevolent toddlers may be redundant, but so that these are also like literal journey stories, whether it's even just as simple as walking, a wooden boardwalk or plankway, I guess it would be. I don't know. I'm just trying to run through the other stories. Are there journeys in the rest of the stories? I mean, the Answer Man, there's a drive past a particular place that you go to several times in your life.
Oh, you're right. You're right, John. Danny Coughlin, he drives to another city for this dream. It's this very prophetic dream.
Yeah.
Oh wow, you're dead on.
Yeah, that there's a lot of journeying in these narratives, and a lot of driving, a lot of time on the road. But yeah, these older men in these stories, they're still on the road, as it were. They're still traveling and literally and metaphorically, and still encountering these threats that they have to. It's funny, actually, in all three cases, they have to deal with there's a very physical aspect. So, Grandpa has to get the baseball bat and he has to knock these guys down with it. The guy in Laurie has to use his walking stick to try to fend off the alligator. And at the end of Rattlesnakes, Vic has to take the twins' double carriage and hurl that out into the strait between Rattlesnake Key and what used to be Duma Key. So that there's a kind of a physicality that these guys have to engage in that I think is maybe made just more dramatic, almost by default, by the fact that they're all in their mid-70s and their hips hurt and their backs hurt and so on.
I am so thrilled to hear these connections. I'm so happy, Mr. Langan. Oh my gosh. So good. Such good stuff. So really quick, I do want to ask, because we've both recently read the You Like It Darker short story collection. Do you have a favorite or favorites from said collection?
Oh man, I thought there was something really to like in all of them, to be quite
Yeah.
honest with you. I thought the ending of the first one, Two Talented Bastards,
Oh,
was crushing. I
yes.
thought and I don't know if this is something that King would have done in a novel. Neil McRobert has suggested that in his short stories, King the knife is a lot sharper in his short
Yeah,
stories, and
absolutely.
and so the son, the narrator, realizing I don't have the talent. I don't have this talent I've always wanted to have. Oh my God, that still hurts,
Yeah.
and yeah, the longer stories. I mean, Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream. There is a part of me that almost wanted it to be longer, because it could be just a short story. He had this dream, he called in, they found the woman, it never happened again. But it is, and I'm not the first person to say this, the introduction of the Jalbert character, the Javert character. Holy cow, does that turn this into something else, man?
Yes.
It's just, yeah, what happened if you only had like this one supernatural event? I mean, the same thing is kind of true in Two Talented Bastards too. That one thing happens and you're like, holy cow! But then how does that change the way you see the rest of the universe, or the way the rest of your life is? Rattlesnakes is really good though.
It is.
Rattlesnakes is really good, and I know that's the kind of the sort of crowd pleaser. Oh, we're back to Cujo, and it picks up on Cujo in really interesting ways. I think. Now I'm like, oh, what other characters could Steve revisit? Like in 11/22/63, isn't it? We see Richie and Bev, maybe,
Yep. Yep.
or that we so every now and again he'll do that, and it was a nice kind of ending, I suppose, for Cujo, for which is such a bitter and hard kind of book at the end, but I haven't really answered your question, so I don't know. I like them all. Good for you, Steve.
I love your answers. They're perfect because it expresses exactly how I feel, which is just hopscotching around the strengths of so many of them. All I know, Mr. Lang, is I think Rattlesnakes is so masterful. I like short circuit when I think of the genius of that.
Oh, the snakes
Oh,
are horrifying. The snakes are awful.
awful.
That scene with the vision, with the hand and the snakes and the
Oh, yeah.
bathtub. Forget that. Yeah.
Really bad. I am not a snake fan. And growing up as a little desert girl, we were taught very young, red on yellow, you're a dead fellow, and red on black, you're okay,
Like,
Jack.
okay.
That's our kindergarten around here, Mr. Langan.
Yeah, yeah, no, I try very hard. I've tried very hard. When my son was little, we watched a lot of The Croc Hunter, and he would. The one thing I loved about Steve Irwin is he would always say, "Crikey, if I get too close to this fella, he'll eat me face. But that's totally fine because I'm in his environment and I shouldn't be here." And I always loved that about him, that he was like, yes, this is a dangerous creature, but it's not an evil creature. It's just I'm intruding in his space, or her space, and so I try very hard with snakes and spiders to feel that, to be like, hey, they're just doing their own thing, but there is still a kind of like primal revulsion, when I see a snake slithering away through the grass, and I try very hard to be like, oh, look, there's a snake. How charming. Look at that. That's not horrifying at all.
I have a quick. This is okay. So we're getting towards the end. I'm just having so much fun with Mr. Langan. I gotta grab on. I gotta latch on as tightly as possible.
Like Pity Sing the Cat.
Yes, I got a cat claw into John Langan for a few more minutes. But yes, so the ending of Rattlesnakes, because you and I are very big Duma Key fans, because
Yes.
you are Wireman, as you know. And so,
Yes, muchacho. Yes.
yes, you are Wireman and Paul is Edgar. Or I think you guys take turns being Wireman,
We started
actually.
switching off. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe see, maybe no. Yeah.
Maybe see, maybe no. I just love that we have the characters from Cujo, but then he also takes Duma Key, and we get this sandwich of these two novels and the beach gothic. And in the final moments of the story, there is a man on the beach waving to Vic. And
Right.
I thought it was Edgar, but a couple people I've spoken to have said otherwise. And who did you feel that man on the beach was?
Well, I took it as Ted,
Okay.
Tad, excuse me. I took it as Tad, this child who died, but somehow his afterlife was not tormented in the same way the twins' afterlife was. And so he's able, to gesture to his father from across the strait, and we know that Duma Key was this kind of magical place. Although I feel like I missed something, the fact that the Duma Key has been wiped out. I was just like, when did this happen? And maybe it did. Maybe King has made reference to it in a book, and I just completely missed it. But maybe he just did that, for this book. Just, oh yeah, that happened. What are the hurricanes?
It's in the very last of Duma Key when Edgar, because Wireman, of course, has a tragic fate, and we're
Right.
learning about that as the reader. And then he says, I think I'm going to draw a storm because I still have the power just a little bit. And he's like, I think there's going to be a really big storm on Duma Key. And that's kind of the
Oh,
final, and that's all we know. We don't know if it's successful. And so that's what's so cool is then in Rattlesnakes, we find out.
thank you. That is brilliant. Yeah. No, that's great.
It's very subtle at the end of Duma Keys. Like, I think there's going to be a big storm. And so we just know he's going to draw one last time, one last
Right.
painting to wipe
Right.
it
Right.
out. And it worked. But of course, like the Overlook, they're going to rebuild the damn thing.
Right. Well, that's the thing, right? Is that they're like, oh yeah, we can reclaim Duma Key, and I thought, oh man, so that Duma Key Part 2,
Oh my God. But yeah, so I agree. I feel this is one of the strongest short story collections, but something about the Answer Man, Mr. Langan, had me sobbing at my kitchen table. I don't necessarily know why, but stuff hits different. Who knows how? But the Answer Man, I just was frozen reading it at my kitchen table for hours. And then when I got to the end, it was just like the ugly cry. And
yeah.
I didn't cry at any other story. I loved so much everything. Rattlesnakes, Two Talented Bastards. I really loved The Dreamers. I felt that was very similar to Revival. I got a lot of Revival
Absolutely.
vibes.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I loved thinking about Revival. I loved being in that space again. I love that character. It was great. So many triumphs, but the Answer Man just, it got me real good.
Well, it's it's a weird thing, but do you remember there's a moment in The Force Awakens, and I'm not the hugest fan of that final trilogy, but there's a moment when they meet Han Solo, and we're all like, Han Solo, and he says to them, yeah, the Force Jedis, it's all true.
Yeah.
It was all true, and there's the ending of The Answer Man is kind of like that. It's all true. Yes, it's all true. Yes, there's something. Yes, there's nothing. Yes, it's great. Yes, it's terrible. That there's this, the only way that you can express it, what is going to come next, is by yes. Is that that whatever comes next is there is an affirmation, and I think that especially because the story manages in this way that King has in certain stories. I think Neil compared it to The Life of Chuck, but I think there may be others as well. It manages to just encapsulate this guy's life in whatever 20, 30 pages, something like that. It's not a particularly long story, and there are ways in which it has almost the feel of kind of Twilight Zone or sort of Ray Bradbury in one of his kind of gentler moods, although there's still some darkness in the story. And it just takes us through this guy's life, and one of the questions that I think one of the interesting questions that this story raises for us is, who is this guy? King sometimes just puts these people in, and we're like, well, what are they? Are they gods? Are they like who are they? And we don't know. We don't. And there's the weirdest connection I guess I can make is there's a Henry James story called The Great Good Place, which is about this guy who is just buried under work. He's a writer. He's got all these articles, all these things to write, and he's drowning in work. And he gets kind of like transported to this wonderful resort. in the mountains somewhere, probably like Switzerland, the Alps, something like that. And it's just lovely. It's just wonderful. It's just completely restorative. And it costs a ridiculous amount of money, but nonetheless, it's being paid for him. And then at the end, he gets to go back. And there's this young guy who's come and done all his work for him. So it's just kind of like this fantasy story of relief from the burdens of the world. And one of the points that the narrator or the protagonist of the story makes is that, like, the fact that this thing costs so much sort of shows that it's worth something, basically, which is maybe a very capitalist way to look at things. But I feel like there's something like that with the answer man. You know, the answer man doesn't just give you the answers. You have to pay for the answers. And that's your commitment to the process. And it's also a sign that they're worth something, you know, that this is not just BS. And I think that we see, right, that some of the answers help him. Some of the answers, and in other cases, he never asks the right questions. He never thinks to ask the right questions. So I think there's something to be said, isn't there, for those stories that sort of take in all of someone's life in a very elegant kind of way, you know. And I think by having the 3 meetings with the answer man, that really allows King to telescope this guy's life, the span of this guy's life, into a relatively short story.
Oh, perfectly said, Mr. Langan. Yeah, it's that passing of time. And I think for me, what's the real kicker, I mean, not only is the philosophical power very palpable, very emotional, because it's very human, and I think we can all identify with it. Nobody knows what's on the other side. We really don't. There are theories, there are books, there are people who say they've been there and came back. We just don't know. I don't think we're supposed to know as humans. And so that fear and anxiety is there, but also this beautiful story of this man's life. And unfortunately, there's a lot of tragedy. There's a lot of tragedy to this guy's life, and he hangs on and he does the best he can at the end, which is to sow into your community, which is to plug in and serve others, which is the most beautiful thing we could do with the time we have left. And so I love that King puts that out there. Like, it doesn't matter how many times you've been hit. You need to remember people do have it worse. You have to continue. You have to keep plugging back into serving others, keep helping your fellow man. And so that sandwiched with everything else is like way too much for my little soul.
Well, I think that you know, like, King is not afraid of an unhappy ending.
No.
You know, like the dreamers, you know, I mean, that's not a happy ending, you know, and as I said, I think the ending of Two Talented Bastards is just heartbreaking. So to have something that doesn't ignore the pain in this guy's life, but at least allows for some possibility of something more, from the guy that at least seems as if he knows, you know, like he just seems as if he is going to tell you what he tells you is going to be true in whatever weird way it's going to be true. I think that's a kind of powerful way to end this collection. It's funny because I don't know if you noticed, but like the story, the kind of acknowledgments in this collection, I felt were very, like, they had this almost like valedictory kind of air. Like, you know, I've tried to be a good writer and I haven't always like I've never kind of reached the platonic ideal that was in my mind and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, Steve, stop. Come on, man. Stop. You're freaking me out.
Oh, I love that you brought that up. I agree, Mr. Langan. I don't know if it's just his personality, but I've had a personal hypothesis that the reason why King is just book after book after book, yes, I believe he is dedicated to the craft, but I also believe deep down in his soul, somewhere, somehow, he does not believe he's good enough and he's trying to compensate, because it's a deep, it's just a hypothesis. I have no evidence, of course, but it's like he's trying to prove something to himself.
Yeah.
He's in a competition with himself, and it has been at minimum the last 30 years. And so I feel there's something in there, and it probably is more tamped down as he's aged, because for whatever reason, I feel the fiction is getting better. Like, it's just getting stronger and stronger and stronger as he ages, which is mind-blowing. But that's just a personal hypothesis of mine. I think like there's a deep-seated inadequacy inside of him. I have no idea.
No, well, I think that, when he was younger, he would talk about his prose as, oh, the literary equivalent of a Big Mac and fries, and it was very self-deprecating. And yet he said that, but it was also clear that he was really ambitious as a writer, and I think that, you could see that as the Big Mac and fries is it's a defense mechanism, right? But I think the problem is when you start to say, I'm not very good, like people start like that's, you're giving people ammunition to shoot at you. And I think that, he's talked sometimes about novels like Lisey's story, as like really, really swinging for the fences very deliberately, getting, I think it was Nan Talese to give him a really, really rough edit on it and really, really, pushing him. So I think, at this point, he's not that old. He's, mid-70s. Mid-70s does not seem as old to me as it used to when I was first reading Stephen King, But, Peter Straub died, 22, I guess it was, and that's, like some of his old friends have moved on. And I think that, of course, that's going to turn your mind to thoughts of mortality and thoughts of legacy too. What is it that you leave behind and that you have left behind for your family, for the world, for other writers. So I guess I can sort of understand it. I noticed actually in the last several collections, I think it's also true in the Bazaar of Bad Dreams, that he talks about not being able to write really the stories like as well as he wants as they appear to him in his mind. So it's not new, but it just sort of struck me this time. He talks about, I wrote these stories with my son Joe, and I wrote this novel with my son Owen, and it's was very much like I want to make sure I thank everybody, and I just. Yeah, and it could just be a general kind of, hey, everybody's getting older, but it definitely freaked me out.
I agree. I think that that's probably the bulk of what it is. Being very present with age and time and saying goodbye when we don't want to say goodbye and reporting from the front lines. And King's always done a beautiful job of that. He's the American realist, which I think is one of the coolest things. Neil said it right to his face. Like, I don't think you're a horror writer. I think you're an American realist.
Right.
And I feel it's like the truest thing ever. And it is. He agreed. And so I believe he's just reporting from the front lines of age, of time, of being in this country, of life. And it's really, really a privilege to get to observe this guy's art and try and figure it all out. But it's pretty simple when you look at it, but so complex and so rewarding.
Yeah.
As someone who's almost 40, I'm not there yet.
So a child is what you're saying. So as a child. Okay, yes, go on. Yeah.
A spring chicken, if you will. I am I'm noticing a couple things, but talking with others where you're like, oh wow, you really stopped caring about a lot of things, huh? It's very, very different as you get to those years.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that it's weird, I mean, as I've gotten older, I'm 55, and I have noticed the last few years, it's difficult to maintain. It's difficult to because you get to 55 and your early 50s, whatever, and you start to understand like the whole midlife crisis is such a cliche, but you certainly start to understand how, man, I'm getting older. I have less time ahead of me than I have behind me. And you just sort of, and to remain true to what it is you're trying to do, to remain true to writing, let's say, and to just keep going in there and trying to get better, and to do the work, to do better work, to remain faithful to that it's difficult. And I mean, yeah, I get it. I'm not going to trade this job for digging a ditch, so but it is just to say that, like, I understand on some level why so many people, when they hit this point in their life, just freak out. They get the younger trophy spouse and they get the sports car and they move to Florida or whatever the hell it is. Like I get that because you're trying to flee what is ahead of you. You're trying to flee this, what's approaching and what you have to try to remain. I don't know, like steady in the face of. Maybe not calm, but like steady in the face of.
Oh, Mr. Langan, you need a 200-seat lecture hall. Jammed.
Yeah.
You do. I'll call people. We're going to make it.
Okay.
Oh, what a rich, decadent hour plus I've had with Mr. Langan. I so appreciate you, sir. I want to talk with you for 5 more hours, but that's not very considerate.
Well, it is a little late here in the East. Where I'm not that far from Falmouth, and it's very late right here.
Thank you so much for chatting short story with me. I love your scholarship. I love your perspective. It is so rich and meaty, full of wisdom, and I'm just gushing. Thank you for sharing your genius and your perspective with everybody out there. And any Langan updates for anybody who's curious?
I just got back from Spain, where I was one of the guests of honor at the Celsius 232 festival. That's Fahrenheit 451 in Celsius. It was in a little town in the north of Spain called Aviles, which is just fantastic. It was a wonderful festival.
Basque region or
just about.
Okay.
I was there, among other things. I was sort of sitting with my Spanish publishers, one of whom is Basque and the other of whom is from the south of Spain, from Cordoba, and they're just wonderful. They run this press called La Biblioteca de Carfax. They publish a bunch of Stephen Graham Jones, Gemma Files, and yeah, it was just a wonderful, wonderful time. So next month, August, I'll be in Providence in Rhode Island for Necronomicon. And then in October, September into October, like there's all kinds of weekend things I'm doing. I'll be in Milan in Italy for a few days in the middle of October for a book festival there. And yeah, so lots of traveling. Both in the past, I was out at StokerCon in San Diego in June, and and lots of travel in the future too. A little bit of writing, but not as much as I would like. But I am hoping to have a new collection out next year and a novel out the year after. So fingers crossed.
Oh, beautiful. I'm so excited for your year of adventure.
Thank you.
Vicariously gluing myself to your European jaunts.
Oh, yes, my jaunts, yeah. There was a story called The Jaunt, wasn't there?
There was. Longer than you'd think, Mr. Langan.
Yeah, that doesn't sound so good, yeah.
I know, oh my God, terrifying. But yes, I will let you return to your evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for such a lovely conversation. It's great that we can talk about these things in such depth. I mean, it's a great privilege to be able to do.
I agree, good sir. Thank you for coming over to my neck of the woods and bringing all of your brilliance. We will talk to you again soon because I'm going to find another short story and ring your doorbell until you answer it.
I will be there. I will be there with bells on.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, John.
Okay, take care, Kim.
Okay, sweet lambs, the end has been reached, and thankfully in this space, we are free from homicidal side-of-the-road maniacs, killer snakes, and territorial Florida dinosaurs, aka alligators. Ollie ollie oxen free, we're safe. Many huge thank yous to John for taking us here, there, and everywhere with this King short story exploration. If you're not in love with John Langan by now, well, I don't know what to tell you, but encourage that you immerse yourself into his incredible writing and report back, because it's only a matter of time before you're in the Langan fan club. If you enjoyed the latest Stephen King short story collection, You Like It Darker, and would like to hear my thoughts on each of the stories, please head to my Patreon called The Dance Macabre with Kim C., where I spent a few weeks this summer sharing my reader reactions for each of the 12 stories within the new collection. It's a lot of fun. There were tears, there was laughter, there was a little confusion, but mostly this collection is amazing, and I'm really smitten for a lot of these new stories. So feel free to head to the Patreon at patreon.com/dancewithkimc, that's dance with an S, for a greater dose of the You Like It Darker coverage. All right, friends, I am a busy one. I need to return to a little town called Calabrin Sturgis because children are being abducted by the wolves, and Roland and the rest of the quartet have their work cut out for them. I'm currently making my way through Wolves of the Calla, Book 5 of the Dark Tower saga for the very first time. So I need to get back to that as I'm absolutely enraptured, my guys. Hold the phone, dudes. Wow. I also forgot that the first week of October 2024 will provide us the new Salem's Lot film adaptation on the Max streaming service. I'm going to watch that, and I'm going to record my thoughts ASAP. So that is actually going to be our very next episode. I want to talk about Salem's Lot with everybody. I'm so excited for this new adaptation. It really has taken a long time to see the light of day, so I'm looking forward to discussing that, followed quickly by my return to the tower. I'm so excited. It's going to be great. It's been a long road and a long time resuming my walk with Roland, so it should be a rather epic return. Stay tuned for that. For those of you who haven't said hello yet, please feel free to reach me on any of the socials or send me a quick email at underratedsk@gmail.com, where I will promptly say hello as quickly as I'm able to. School is full on in session, so my time is a little bit squelched, but I so appreciate anyone who writes into the show, so please feel free to say hello whenever, wherever, as I'd love to hear from you. Until our Salem's Lot coverage fast approaching, take care, everyone. Even if the temperature gauge shows otherwise, we're on our way to autumn. It's coming. I feel it. We're nearly there. Spooky times are almost upon us. Thank you once more, everyone out there, for listening to the show. I appreciate you all so much. I'll talk to you soon.